All right. That's a
Okay.
new feature. With that,
Okay.
hello, everyone. Welcome back. Welcome to another episode of Seeds of Liberation, the podcast where I and my co-pastor, Reverend Michael Johnson, come to you and talk about faith and justice. And today we have a hot issue
Oh, Lord.
that we want to get into with you. Today, we want to talk about abortion and abortion rights. As you may know or may have heard, there are a large number of bills going through different state legislatures right now around restricting women's rights to abortion and to that particular kind of medical treatment. One article that I read said that since January 1st of 2021, there have been 61 new restrictions put in place in 13 different states. 13 different states
Oh, Lord.
have passed restrictive abortion legislation this year alone. And
Say it ain't so, Pastor. Wait a minute now. Well, I must have been sleeping.
I know. There's so many things going on that the GOP controlled legislatures in these states are just sliding it through and thinking that no one's paying attention. And this is in the news this week because in the great state of Texas,
Texas again? not find a new state, Pastor.
God bless our siblings in Texas.
Not Texas again. George Bush state. All right.
Yes, Texas just passed a bill this past week that is referred to as a trigger bill, which basically means if the Supreme Court overturns Roe v. Wade, the famous ruling that allowed abortion services to be more accessible in our country, if the Supreme Court turns it over, then in the state of Texas, a law will automatically be put into place in the state law as well. And part of this bill that also got passed was that attempting to give medical care in the form of abortions will become illegal as well, and will be raised to the level of a felony. So for women who receive an abortion in the state of Texas, or for medical doctors who offer that kind of care, they will be able to be charged with a felony.
Wow.
Which is amazing in the worst way. Astounding, really, because in that state and most others, rape is not a felony.
Wow. Really, Pastor?
I know.
My Lord. Teach, sister, teach.
So now we're going to penalize women for choosing their own healthcare choices more than we will penalize men for infringing upon women's bodies and creating some of the circumstances that might make someone choose to have an abortion. So we need to talk about this, y'all, because also in this conversation, our faith gets thrown around, the Christian faith gets thrown around left and right and co-opted by folks whose life choices, whose actions in the world demonstrate that they really ain't got nothing to do with the ministry of Jesus Christ. But they use our sacred texts to support an opinion. And so we want to talk about that today. And the first thing we want to name is, and I'm sure that many of us are aware, certainly in our community, in the Black community, the great hypocrisy that is present in pro-life arguments in a world in which our lives are not valued, in which Black life is not valued, in which the lives of children are not valued.
Yes.
And then we're going to come back and make legislation that puts the lives of women in danger and say that and call it pro-life. And that's not to say that there aren't, we know that there are faithful people who have done their own discernment and praying and do truly support from a place of faith and action a pro-life position. But by and large, those who are creating legislation are doing it in this one realm, which will give them control over women's bodies and greatly neglecting the rest of the life that they so vehemently claim to protect. And one of the greatest examples of this, one of the most barefaced showings, is that Texas, the state of Texas, the same day this bill was passed, the state of Texas executed a prisoner who was in the midst of defending or seeking a retrial and still claiming, still holding on to, still standing up for himself and saying that he was falsely accused. But the state of Texas executed him anyway. And so how can you in the morning, in the morning, declare yourself to be a pro-life state, and in the evening take someone's life?
Wow.
And so we want to be really real today and talk about how these methods, these bills, this pro-life agenda, which is what we're seeing, right? All these states aligning themselves, getting ready for what they hope will be a Supreme Court decision to restrict abortion rights. That this really is about controlling women's bodies, not about protecting unborn life. And how convenient it is to advocate for the unborn, those who can't hold you accountable, those who can't make any demands on you, those who can easily just be a tool for you to use for the oppression of women. One of the things that we need to be really real about is that abortion, though it is often painted as a frivolous choice, a choice of those who are calculating or don't care or are irresponsible with their sexuality, abortion very often is a life-saving medical intervention for women who are going through difficult pregnancies, who are much too young to have been impregnated, and whose lives will be at risk. So taking away, outlawing a life-saving measure does not seem to line up with the claim of caring about life to me. And it is especially detrimental in a society that has been set up in such a way where our community, the Black community, Black and Brown communities, are bearing a weight of the highest mortality rates among pregnant women and fetuses, right? Because of environmental racism, because of the racism that's baked into the medical system, because of the pressure and unhealth that's created for Black women living in this society we created. Black women have the highest rate of complication and death in pregnancy. And so until you legislatures can address those problems, I really can't believe or trust that you actually care about the life of fetuses or mothers. Because as soon as that unborn child starts to transition into a born child, they're on their own. They're thrown to the wolves. Um, and so, all of these things show us, in addition to, right, where's the legislation that tells us that you care about health care for pregnant women, that you care about access to nutrition for all pregnant women? Where's the legislation that says that you care about the financial support of pregnant women, right? If we think that unborn fetuses have rights, then how come we can't insure our unborn fetuses, right? So that if their lives are lost, the value of that life is realized in actual money to help us support that grief and loss and the toll that it takes on the life of the mother. So I mean, it doesn't take a lot of paying attention, knowing women who have gone through pregnancy and who have lost children, whose children have died, whose babies have died. It doesn't take a lot of looking to see the thinly veiled hypocrisy of this legislation, and that it really is not in any way for our help as women, but is instead for our harm, for control of our bodies. Not to mention, and this is my alley-oop for you, Pastor, not to mention the way that it creates a narrative where pregnancy and childbearing is all responsibility of the mother, of the person carrying the child.
Oh Lord, yeah, here I come, Pastor. First of all, I mean, this is a profound and deep subject that we have. There's been a war for many years in this country, and my hat is off to Pastor Anderson and her leadership and women like her with the courage to speak up, even though many of us men folk do not listen. And I just thank her for all that she's taught me about this issue. And so, and yeah, we as men, oh Lord, one of the most incredible things to me through all this rhetoric about pro-life, as we've been told, which it ain't even about pro-life, and it's not important. It's really about controlling women's bodies, as Pastor Anderson said so very well. Is that through all this rhetoric, there is never, ever, I can't even, sometimes we can say hardly ever, but in this case, never is there any attempt to hold the men accountable who participate in at least half of the responsibility of the act of a woman being impregnated. There's no legislation that says, oh, we got to find the guy who's out there who impregnated this woman, who's responsible for this baby. No legislation on that, on controlling that man. Let's go find him and control his body.
Right.
I mean, we finally got something that's righteous that we could go after, and we go after the victim, as always in this country, because that's what we do.
Mm-hmm.
Because and Lord knows we can't ever hold straight white men accountable for a damn thing in this country. But men, period, black, white, red, yellow, men are never held accountable in this whole escapade of attacking women and trying to gain control over the one thing that they have that we shouldn't try to take from them, and that's their body and the right to make decisions over what's theirs,
Right.
that was given to them by God. Um, and so that, I mean, it's that's just incredible. So fathers, teach your sons. Somebody, y'all, we need to really step up to the plate in this issue and go on a listening campaign,
Mm,
men. Um,
right.
shut the hell up and listen. I mean, we need to let to no, I'm sorry, there I go again, my sexism. I use that, I'm sorry, Pastor. We not letting y'all do nothing. You do it because it's your right. And I'm a recovering sexist. Hey, oh Lord, here we go now. Come on. I mean, we talk about racism and white privilege, but here's an instance where we got to talk about male privilege because we talking about sexism, which may be the oldest ism, y'all. I
Mhm.
don't know. We were talking about how Adam threw Eve under the bus early on. They didn't even know what color they were, but they
Right.
and so, okay, men, we got to step up. We got to do better than what we're doing. Shut up and listen. The
Mhm.
other piece is, with all of this democracy, oh Lord, because of the changing demographics in our country, where we've now been told, and we've talked about this before, but sometimes repetition is the best way to learn, because I used to be hard-headed too. So um, you say it over and over again, and maybe you'll get it. But because of the changing demographics in our country, where sociologists are telling us that in 20 years there will no longer be a racial plurality, or um, there will be no race that is larger. Okay,
Mhm.
having a brain moment.
Yeah, majority,
Than the other.
numerical majority.
Majority. Thank you, sister. Amen.
Yeah.
There will be no racial majority in this country. We'll have more parity on the lines of numbers. And so this is causing our white siblings to jump off the cliff when it comes, especially straight white men who have enjoyed all this power in every endeavor and every way in our country since its inception of this experiment we call the United States. And so, because of that, you see that the right has decided, forget democracy. Then
Mm.
we just go around Roe v. Wade. That was the Supreme Court. It's okay when the Supreme Court is ran by conservatives, but when liberals try to put something out there that might free people in a way, we go around it, and then we use the other old trick of states' rights and all
Mm.
this stuff, that we want to give states rights when it's convenient, when it serves whiteness, when it serves those who are in power. We want to give states rights, but if state legislatures happen to be ran by liberals or people of color, or, oh Lord, women, oh, now let's go back to the federal government. Oh no, we can't control that either. Well, let's just make a dictatorship now. I mean,
Right.
and we're just gonna be led by white men. And so we're seeing that all over the country now, with all this anxiety, especially with the 2000 with 2020 election, and conservatives showed up in force, and it was not enough. When organized grassroots people, led by women leaders all over the country,
Yep.
stepped up and God showed out. Now we got to change stuff so that democracy does not matter.
Mhm.
But the biggest no, not the biggest, I'm sorry. One of the biggest hypocrisies in all
Another
of
big
this,
one.
I got to be careful because I'm trying, because Pastor Anderson is the authority on this issue, not Mike Johnson. Um, so, but one of the biggest hypocrisies is the whole notion that we give a damn about children. We don't. As Pastor Anderson just said, that once the child is pushing its way in the world, we don't care. We'll leave them at the border in cages,
Mm.
because they're not white. Oh Lord, or my Lord, or if one comes on a boat from Haiti of African descent, we'll send them back into the storm, back into children or whatever. And so there may be a reality that tells us that being born may not be the greatest thing for some children in this country, depending on what context they come out of. Oh, yeah, I said it. I mean, my goodness. I mean, the way that we have legislated abuse into our system, where it is legal, it's okay to abuse children, in this adoption
Mm.
legislation that we've taken on, where people are just, so there are some people just in the business to just collect money and not actually render services to our babies.
Mhm.
And so Lord have mercy, but a woman left on her own to shoulder the whole burden of everything certainly should have the right to decide what happens to her body. But I mean, we can go all over the place. I mean, we spend billions of dollars on military weapons, but then when the budget comes down to education, there's we spend a percentage of money on what we do to help our babies, where in this state we spend over $50,000 a year to house an inmate at Jackson State Penitentiary, but spend $7,000 to educate our babies. Now, we need to quit this crap about we care about children, because we really don't care about children in the land of the free, of the land of the so-called free, and the land of the brave. Oh Lord.
Mhm.
Oh
Yeah.
Lord.
And in a nation that is majority Christian, right?
Oh,
And that
oh, oh, oh
claims
Lord.
that identity. You
Ouch.
know, our state, the state of Michigan, a quarter of our children, 25% of our children are food insecure, don't have enough to eat. And that's
Mm,
been a solid statistic for at least the last 10 years.
mm,
We ain't done nothing about it,
wow.
as a nation, as a state, right? And yet we're going to say, we're going to claim, we're going to labor under the illusion that we care about children, right? We have children being arrested by the police as
Wow.
young, stories of children as young as 6 and 8 years old, right? Getting taken from school in handcuffs. Um, but we care about children. Come on, y'all.
Oh,
We have to
oh,
be honest.
oh,
This
oh.
is a moment of honesty.
One quick piece too, Pastor, in that I forgot to mention that I got wrote down here is, let us not also remember that in the average church, oh Lord, let's bring it home to the
Uh-oh.
congregation, that in the average church, whenever we get in budget crunches, what's the first thing we cut? whatever little money, which ain't much anyway, that we have budgeted to youth ministry is one of the first thing that gets cut on the budget, on the editing floor when it comes to our little finance meetings. And very few church councils or boards ever have anybody on their board that said, wait a minute, I'm leaving this church if we cut our children. We
Mm.
don't do anything for our children any damn way. So why? And the first thing we cut, and I know because I was the president of a church council for 12 years before I became a pastor, and we did it.
Mhm.
We cut the budget for babies before we cut anything else. I'm sorry, Pastor. Go on back in there. I just
No, nope.
just gotta call the church out now. We
Yeah, if you can't say amen, say ouch.
go.
Y'all, ouch, ouch, ouch. But it's part of our systemic training, right? It's part of the way we're socialized to think that women and children can just have the short end of the stick, can be invisible, and that's normal. That's normal. And until you pay attention, until you listen to the voices of women and children, until you are living um, in the struggle with women and children, then it's easy to go along with that. And the ugly truth of systemic oppression, whether we're talking about racism, sexism, heterosexism, classism, right, is that we like to wear blinders and pretend that it's no big deal. But when we get into marginalized communities, when we're living in marginalized communities, our norms we start to see are actually costing people their lives. It's
Wow.
it shows up. We have a chance to practice going against the status quo in our church budgets, in our neighborhoods, in our everyday lives, in our schools. Um, and we have to practice it because in the places we're not looking at, going along with the status quo is costing people their lives. And once in a while, we have these stories that come through that pop up where we see children who are murdered by their parents, where we see young women who are having forced sterilization at the border because they've been caged and detained
Mm,
there, where we see children who are getting sick and dying because they can't receive the medical care that everyone deserves, right?
mm.
And so the question is, are we going to keep the blinders on and keep pretending like we are doing right by women and children when really what we're doing is ignoring their death and destruction?
That's right.
And
Teach
this is
us.
that moment. Um, this is a moment when that opportunity has come again for us to take off our blinders and for Christian people to really um, stand on the teaching of our faith instead of standing on the privilege that society gives us. To stand to follow the way of Jesus in truth, right? Um, Instead of just talking about it and picking up um, political rhetoric that doesn't have anything to do with Jesus.
Ouch. Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am. Please.
So we want to look at a couple scripture passages
Right. Help
to
us,
deepen
sister.
this conversation for those of us who are Christian people.
Hmm.
The first one that we want to go to is from Deuteronomy, one of our favorite texts. Both Pastor Johnson and I get really excited when this comes up in the preaching schedule. Deuteronomy 30.
Oh man. Yes.
Yes, it's the part in the story where Moses is preparing to end his ministry. He's led God's people through the wilderness. They're finally at the end. They're getting ready to cross over into the promised land, and Moses knows he's not going with them. And he delivers this amazing sermon, this amazing speech, really powerful. And in Deuteronomy 30, chapter 30, verse 19. The whole passage is great from 15 all the way to 15 to 20. So I encourage you to read that on your own. But in verse 19, Moses says to the people,
Oh Lord.
I call heaven and earth to witness against you today, that I have set before you life and death, blessings and curses. Choose life, so that you and your descendants may live loving the Lord your God and obeying God and holding fast to the Lord. For that means life to you and length of days, so that you may live in the land of the Lord swore to give to your ancestors. So I put before you today life and death, blessings and curses. Choose life.
They said choose in that text, Pastor?
They
Man, wait a minute now. Go on and hang out in there for a minute.
Thank you, sir. They said choose life, and we know that passage has been in some ways taken and used by the some pro-life Christians, right? But you lift up the exact right thing, Pastor Johnson. Choose life. That even in this moment of great import to God's people, God is still giving a choice, right? God is still saying, choose, you get to choose. Which we know reflects a deep belief about the God that Christians claim, right? That God gives us free will, that God gives us choice, and that God gives us wisdom and knowledge and understanding that's contextual, so we can be trusted to make a good and right choice. And that's part of who we are as humans and who we are in our relationship with God. But even beyond that, right? The text doesn't say choose life and there's only one way to choose it, right? Choose this one way that has been identified as right, right? And so what happens when we use this as an argument for pro-life sometimes is that we really flatten that word life. Because sometimes, friends, to choose life, if you are a woman who has been impregnated, means to protect your own health. Sometimes it means to make a choice that is best for you to live the full life that God has intended for you. And that choice might not be to carry a fetus. So really, this idea that choosing life looks the same for every person makes this text less meaningful. It makes it anemic to speak to the many realities of what life is in our world and in our context. And the other passage that helps us to have some more perspective on this is Jesus, right? In the book of John, in the Gospel of John, Jesus says, John 10, Jesus says, I have come that you might have life and that you might have it abundantly. And this word, this idea of abundant life is not just about, it's not just a word that connotes a quantity, right? He's not saying just that you could have life forever, right? But it's a word that speaks to the quality of your life, that you might have a full, rich, healthy, a good life, right? A quality of life that God intends for all people to have. And so, that again makes a lot of space for what we consider a quality life, right? What does it mean that God wants us to be well in our life, to have an abundant, full life?
Wow.
And part of what some of us with privilege might have to recognize, whether that's male privilege or white privilege or wealth, economic privilege, is that um, there are a lot of choices that folks have to make who have less privilege, um, to live a quality life. Um, and if you don't have to make those same, if you're not presented with those same choices because of your privilege, then I don't know how you can speak with authority about what someone else should do.
Wow. Yes.
Um, and so, you know,
Yeah. Just another quick piece too, is particularly, also when we talk about the whole notion of choosing, we usually almost always only do it from the standpoint of an individual.
mm,
The other piece is that the text that Pastor Anderson read, especially the Deuteronomy piece when Moses gives his farewell address, it says, "Choose life so that you and your descendants may live," which to me gives an incredible example that your choice also has ramifications for other people.
mm,
And so the issue is that we as a society make choices for people who aren't at the table,
yeah,
who don't get to decide when it comes to their bodies. I mean, when we're talking about black and brown bodies or yellow bodies or anybody of color, but even white women are not really included in our calculus for deciding who and how we are talking about the life of somebody, because really we don't give a damn about the life of the child or the vessel that carries it. Um, but it says that, I think, I mean, this is a communal text,
mm,
as well as an individual text. Um, and all of that in our society is placed on the shoulders of an individual woman, when the community ought to be supporting that woman in her decision.
right,
She still gets to make the decision because it's her body, but we as a community ought to be there in support. And the first supporter ought to be the brother who was in on, who was in on the act,
yes,
when it happened. But I mean, this text is talking about the whole notion of the ramifications of when we make decisions as individuals, and what those decisions mean to the community. I believe that the individual and the context that the individual is making the decisions in.
mm,
um, and so again, men, we need to go on this listening campaign where
mm,
we can figure out. I mean, you can influence the decision. Maybe you could influence it by supporting and listening, or providing resources,
mhm,
and then get the hell out the way. But I mean, but we're not good at holding men accountable in our society, but we are good at trying to hold women accountable.
mm,
When we need to leave women alone because we done messed this is a society that has abused and messed over women and children for too long,
mhm, and continues to.
and continues to.
Yeah.
with the church's consent.
Right. Right.
That's
And we know because we know how internalized oppression works, right? Sometimes it's women who
who
are
participate in their own
participating.
oppression. Yeah.
Sure. Or more also in other women's oppression, right?
I'm glad you said that, Pastor. I couldn't say that.
That's right. You got your hands full with your brothers, so just talk to them. Um,
And myself. Sinner saved by grace, oh Lord.
yes. And so we hope that wherever you're at, and we know there are a variety of opinions about this issue, we hope that you can, at the very least, think about the many complexities that are part of it, and know that there are those of us who are people of faith on all sides of the argument. And the best thing that we can do is to, in the complexity, be committed to the abundant life of our communities, of our women and children. Um, and that's going to take some figuring. It's not a black and white issue. It's not an issue that we can entrust to those who are hungry for power for them to figure out on our behalf. But it's a thing that we have to be in the struggle together around. And so thank you for joining us for this episode. We hope that you will keep this conversation going, keep talking about it, and listening. If you are a male-bodied person, listening about it, not talking about it.
Oh Lord.
And stay in the struggle with us. And we will see you next time on Seeds of Liberation.
Amen.